Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Is True Crime Rocket Science the most authentic voice? Well, in this analysis, we're going to apply some rocket science that's all engines on critical thinking to the viral debunk from Woodworker attorney. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I'll put a link to his video in the description. I don't want to mention his name. I don't want this to appear to be some kind of personal attack. It's not anything personal at all. It's simply looking at a particular opinion, a particular analysis, and really looking at the merits of it, and then also applying critical thinking to that. So I really don't want it to be like one creator taking on another creator. It's really looking at the idea, looking at the thinking, looking at the cognitive aspect to it, and seeing whether there's merit to it. Does that make sense? So Woodworker attorney joined YouTube on the 28th of April, and when he posted his first video 10 days later on May 9th, it went viral. In a flash, it got over 1 million views, and I think right now it's 1.2 million. And his channel went from 0 to over 109,000 subscribers. I think it's gone up to 133,000 already. And so I heard about this video from an article on Mashable dated May 19. So 10 days after that video went out, it was sort of referenced in an article on Mashable titled "The Bitter, Banal and Bizarre YouTube Circus of Depp versus Heard." Now, if you're new to the channel and if you don't know me, I studied law at university. I studied private, family, commercial, and criminal law. I don't have a law degree, but I did study law at university. I've also sat in on a number of high-profile criminal trials, and I've written over 100 books on true crime cases, including high-profile court cases such as O.J. Simpson, Jodi Arias, Casey Anthony, Scott Peterson, and John Benet Ramsey. You may not think there was a trial in the Ramsey case, but there was a grand jury trial that not many know too much about, and there was plenty of litigation around that case as well. Now, in terms of the Woodworker attorney, he describes himself as a partner of a small law firm located in Northern Virginia with a focus on domestic relations litigation and consumer bankruptcy. He's been a practicing litigator for more than a decade with a secondary passion in woodworking, right? Now, I'm going to leave it to you to decide whether a litigator with a focus on domestic relations and consumer bankruptcy and with more than 10 years experience is a better expert at analyzing this case than, let's say, a true crime writer with more than 10 years experience as an investigative photojournalist. I've also got less than 10 years, I think it's less than 10 years as a full-time true crime writer, meaning just under 10 years writing books full-time, with virtually no experience at making or breaking furniture. And so let's now deal with the debunk from this channel's perspective. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to this channel and you're interested in the content and maybe you've been watching a couple of videos, make sure you like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So in this analysis, which is divided into 3 parts, the 3 parts are context, criticism, and the debunk, I'm going to take you through 3 layers or levels of thought process. The first is essentially about sourcing the information and how complete and accurate that part is. The second is about flaws in reasoning. And then the third is my version. In other words, I don't think it's good enough just to say why you think something isn't true or something is somehow not up to snuff or whatever you want to say. In other words, if you're going to criticize something, I think you've also got to stand up and say, well, if there's something wrong with that thought or that idea, well, then can you do something better? Can you offer a better alternative? And so that is what I'll be doing right at the end, is provide an alternative scenario to the one the woodworker attorney sets out. You can then decide which one is more reasonable or what is more likely in sum, based on considering these two opposing views. So you guys are really in the middle, and you are kind of being left to say, okay, that's one argument. There's another argument. You kind of like the judge or the jury in this, right? Okay, so let's start off with context. First of all, I've got to say I appreciate woodworker attorneys' information-rich, logical, fact-based and sensible analysis. It's something quite rare, certainly in the current archives of this particular case, right? Secondly, woodworker attorney does well to provide a balanced and accurate summary of the incident that is covering, which occurred on December 15th, 2015. I would amend that slightly to say that it occurred on the night of December 15th and went on into the morning of December 16th. It was the next morning, after all, that Amber realized the bed was broken, and that was when she took the photograph. She photographed the arm-length splinter that lay on the carpet below it. And then the third thing, in terms of context, woodworker attorney even goes to the trouble to A, provide metadata related to the image, and B, a clip of Amber mentioning the bed in her testimony, specifically where Exhibit 509 is referenced. That's this image. Finally, this is really the fourth point in terms of context, and I think crucially, woodworker attorney also sources this image of the bed from the Property Countdown channel's video tour of Deb's home when he put it up for sale in September 2016. So that's giving you some context in terms of the sourcing of all this information. Now we move on to the next section, criticism. And I want to provide a disclaimer here. I made a few observations at the time I was going through woodworker attorney's video step by step, only to find that some of my criticisms turned out that he'd actually touched on some of the things that I thought he didn't. But I'm nevertheless just going to go through this in the order that I scripted it. So if you feel like I'm saying something that's not accurate, I do address it a little bit later on. Okay, so just bear that in mind. So woodworker attorney, in terms of my criticism here, provides less than 30 seconds of Amber's account of the events. And much of that is dead air, where Amber says absolutely nothing. The only useful testimony from day 2 of Amber's testimony that woodworker attorney offers to the viewer is where Amber says, sounding tearful,
"Will you please tell the jury what this is?"
That's the bed that Johnny broke while on top of me.
Now, in addition to that, woodworker attorney, in terms of his video, he places himself in the left corner of the screen while Amber is testifying and while the image of the bed is on screen. So if the idea is to focus on Amber's version of events rather than the woodworker's criticism of it, he doesn't really allow that, because he inserts himself even in the brief few moments where Amber mentions the bed. As a journalist, I've learned that you should try not to insert yourself into a story, and you might say, well, that's ridiculous in terms of YouTube because everyone's inserting themselves. I nevertheless think when someone is on trial in a court case scenario, then it's especially pertinent that you don't insert yourself. You've got to have your full focus on the person who's on the stand. That's what the jury is seeing. The jury is not seeing that person on the stand plus a creator. So you need to in order to analyze it accurately and truthfully, you need to see what the jury is seeing. Does that make sense? So I looked at just under 14 minutes of testimony surrounding this incident, right? So I didn't look at 30 seconds. I looked at 14 minutes that felt like basically the sum of the narrative from Amber's side, 14 minutes of testimony. And I must also say that while researching this, I really struggled to find it. So just trying to find this moment was quite difficult. although I found the Woodworker attorney's video very quickly, I couldn't really find any analysis or indeed any videos on YouTube based on searching for Amber Heard 15 December 2015 or broken bed, right? I did find lots of videos about poop in a bed, and this was naturally associated with Amber Turd. I find it very interesting that this particular part of the trial narrative was basically absent, and I spent close to half an hour or an hour just trying to source it from the full day's testimony. I also don't think Woodworker attorney provides much information besides the date for sourcing this material. In other words, if you wanted to go and read up about it yourself or verify it yourself, you sort of left to your own devices. And I think it is quite important to allow someone an independent view. In any event, so I'm telling you this is from day 2 of her testimony, and I think I'm actually going to put up a video of that just so that it is findable, right? So I think that's a bit of a problem, that it's difficult to find and independently verify. As I say, I'll be providing the 14 minutes of her testimony as is, but in a separate video, which you can refer to as background for this analysis. I think at the time that you're hearing this video, it won't be up, so it might come up within the next couple of days. Now, in the event that 50 or more unsubscribe from my channel, based perhaps on this video, which has been the pattern thus far, in any video that's not explicitly supportive of Johnny Depp, I'll move the video to the members only section. So I'll put it up, but if a lot of people unsubscribe, which has been the pattern, are you not supporting Johnny Depp? Okay, I'm unsubscribing. Well, then I just move it to the members only section. So that's the first criticism, that Woodworker attorney cites rather little from the source material. And although it's not necessarily the Woodworker attorney's fault, it's quite difficult to independently view the source, except with a lot of effort. Then on to the next thing. Woodworker attorney also seems to see something iffy or dodgy in the timing of the photo. It's apparently suspicious because she didn't snap the photo immediately after being headbutted and in her version suffering a concussion. The image appears to be taken at 10:57 and 10 seconds the next morning, so just less than 3 minutes before 11 a.m. And Woodworker attorney seems to think this delay is associated with staging her assault. That's how I understood it. Then Woodworker attorney provides a lesson on the intricacies of wood, but what I find lacking in his expert analysis is that he can't seem to identify the type of wood we are dealing with. And so that was something that I thought at the time that I wrote this, but apparently at 13:46 in his video, he does apparently identify the wood as pine based on the grain pattern. I'm not sure that I agree with him. I suppose it's possible that it is pine, but the color of the wood splinter doesn't appear to be pine to me. I'm talking about color. Pine is a whitish color, whereas wood is the wood that you see in that picture is kind of dark. It's kind of a biscuit brown, right? I'm not an expert, but when I look at that wood, it doesn't look like pine to me. This is pine. So for my part, I would say whatever wood it is, it appears to be pretty old, and old wood tends to be more susceptible to drying out, and dry wood splinters and cracks a lot easier. Let me just put it another way. Old wood tends to be more easily cracked than recently cut down wood. Any wood that has been recently cut down and made into timber still holds together quite well. I think that's just absolute common sense, right? It's also true that wood that is often wet, so wood that is, I'm talking about made wet by moisture or rain, wood that is out in the open can also rot and split as well, right? A further observation that the Woodworker attorney seems to miss is that effectively the wooden frame surrounding the bed acts as a sort of table or step, In other words, you can imagine the person using the bed stepping onto the frame before stepping onto the bed, or perhaps sitting on it, or perhaps placing shoes or drinks or books on it as well. Next, the Woodworker attorney refers to Amber's testimony in the UK trial, which doesn't make any sense from a certain perspective. He's an American litigator doing analysis on 2 Americans on trial in America. So why not use Amber's testimony in this trial, as I've done? Also, Amber effectively won her argument in the UK trial. Anyway, Woodworker attorney maybe just needed a transcript he could use, and this one was handy. But okay, let's examine it on its own merit. So what Amber says at point 141 is, and this is quoting from the transcript, this is from the UK trial, quote, "He pushed me onto the bed in penthouse 4 and got on top of me, pushing me face down into the mattress, smothering me and pulling out more hair. I was suffocating. I was trying to scream, hoping he would get off me, but I couldn't even get any sound out. It was like a nightmare. I was panicking, as it felt like Johnny had completely blacked out. It was as if he had completely lost control of himself and nothing could make him stop." Then this part deals with the bed. "His whole weight was on me, and he put his knee on my back and his other foot on the bed frame." I'm not really going to read the rest here, but that's the part that is pertinent, as well as the bed frame splintered, and that's all I remember, right? Then I think she says at the end of that, "I wasn't on the bed but on the floor and Johnny left." I think she says she doesn't remember anything after that, but when she woke up or when she became conscious again, she was sitting not on the bed but on the floor. Now, I've got to admit, when I heard Amber's testimony and her description of this wooden bed frame breaking, I imagined the whole bed sort of broken and lopsided. The image of the splinter seemed a lot less serious than what she described. But what's missing from the above transcript is Amber saying Johnny and her were wrestling, essentially on the bed. When 2 adults fight on a bed, not playful but rough, then damage is quite likely. What I think is also quite clear, and it's even if you are sober and by yourself, this is quite a tricky bed to get into and out of. There's a hard surface to avoid or navigate. She also describes Johnny with one leg resting on the bed frame. And since the bed frame is the more solid or stable surface, if there is pushing and shoving and stepping back and stepping forward and writhing and wriggling, one can imagine wanting to use the bed frame for support. It's almost like, do you want to be in water? If you think about a bed as a very unstable surface, do you want to be in that sort of muddy, mattressy, spongy? Do you want to be there, or do you want to be on this firm substrate of the bed frame? And as I said, it's quite a wide frame, so you can get good purchase on it, right? If you 2 people that are wrestling and there's a tug of war going on, the person who's standing on the bed frame is going to get a lot more support in terms of their footing. Does that make sense? And what if you pushed back? What if the person on the bed is trying to push you off the bed? Well, you'll be able to step back onto it if you've got that support from the bed frame. And also, what if you push to the back of the bed frame and you could lose your balance and fall off? What might you do? And so then the Woodworker attorney refers to something else from the transcript of the UK trial, and it's referred to here as A19, and it reads as follows. The fight continued onto a bed. The claimant got on top of Ms. Heard and placed his knee on her back and the other foot on the bed frame. And then something is screamed and the bed frame splintered under the weight and the pressure of the claimant's boot. So it's clear that the UK trial overall supported Amber's version of events. I think that's something also to stress. I don't think they sort of came out of this and said, okay, this, that, but we don't think that that splinter was made that way. That wasn't what the UK trial found. Anyway, another aspect that Woodworker attorney seems to miss is that the bed frame splinter isn't in isolation. There are other evidence photos too. So you can't just say everything happened, or this whole altercation, and all there is this very oddball evidence photo of the bed frame splinter. It doesn't make any sense. But it's not in isolation. There's a tuft of hair on the ground. There are divots of hair missing from Amber's scalp. Did she stage that as well? If she didn't, why not? If you're going to stage the splinter, why not stage everything? What about the droplets on the pillow? If she staged that, did she stage bruises to her face as well? So the fact is, I think it's hard to suggest more exhibits are staged than if there were fewer. So if you have one exhibit and you say, in other words, the wood splinter, you say, I don't think that's real, I think that's staged. Then you say, well, it's okay, we've got another exhibit dealing with that same incident. Oh, is that staged as well? Okay, well, we've got another exhibit. Oh, is that staged as well? We've got another exhibit. Oh, is that staged as well? And I think it starts to stretch the limits of credulity when you say something like, did she pull hair out of her own head because of the extreme need to stage something? And I think the answer, most logical people, most reasonable people would say no. I don't think she would have done that. In a general sense, in terms of the trial as a whole, there are all manner of injuries to people and to furniture. There's also graffiti and other things broken. And as altercations go, being unable to breathe and apparently losing consciousness is very serious. So you are either arguing that the splintered bed frame was staged and that whatever happened to Amber actually wasn't so serious, or that it was. You've got to make a choice. Either what happened was serious or it wasn't serious. And I guess if you're saying it wasn't serious, you're saying it's actually not even real. It's a hoax, right? I think you must be very, very careful if you're going to make a claim like that, if you're going to dismiss all of it as a hoax. The fact is, about 5 months after this incident, Amber Heard filed for divorce. You think she filed for divorce from this beloved star, this very wealthy guy, on a whim, just because she had a funny mood swing, because she's a strange person, because she's crazy? I think some people will say that. Most people will say people who file for divorce do so not at the drop of a hat. They do so after quite a lot of circumspection, quite a lot of agonized thinking, quite a lot of feelings of being conflicted and unsure and second guessing. And that brings us to point number 68. I think this also comes from the UK trial. And it reads as follows. I do remember going over to somebody around that time to collect some of my things. I'd moved out and I was staying with my boss, but I'd left a bunch of things there. I remember seeing that a bed was disheveled. Oh, this is Rocky Pennington's testimony. She said, I remember seeing that a bed was disheveled. It had a very heavy wood frame, and I noticed it had splintered, and there was a chip in the wood. And the Woodworker attorney makes quite a good point here, saying that Rocky Pennington picks up on a chip in the wood. Now, I've got to say that my understanding of how some people testify sometimes is Rocky is a lay person. She's not a woodwork expert. And so when she talks about a chip in the wood, it may be her mischaracterizing it by mistake. So she may, when she says it had splintered and there was a chip in the wood, she might mean the wood was chipped off. Whereas somebody else might think, oh, there's a chip in the wood, there's a something was inserted, right? And so, although I think Woodworker attorney picking up on this word chip is interesting, it's also interesting that she refers to blonde hair and blood stuck in the splinter, which suggests she may have fallen on it. I'm just saying that amber may actually have fallen on the side of the wood, right? She may even have hit her head on the side of the wood. And that could be actually an alternative explanation for what actually happened there. Rocky also refers to the amount of force needed to damage such a heavy and solid frame. What I think is significant, however, is that she describes a disheveled bed, but does not describe the knife on the comforter, which you would imagine she would have mentioned. Also in the exhibit, the bed does not appear to be one recently wrestled in, which is to say, it appears to have either been made or been pulled over to some extent. In any event, it's at this point that Woodworker attorney finally plays more of Amber's original testimony. And I want to play you the pertinent, it's about 40 seconds.
I was sitting on the edge of the bed, on the carpet of the floor against the broken frame of the bed. And there was a low-lying bed with a really thick wooden frame. And it was broken from his boot trying to get a purchase on it while he was...
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
I could feel it. Overruled.
Thank you. Please continue.
I was there for it. And while he was on top of me, I could feel that. I could feel him trying to get balance. I could feel him slipping. I could hear it. I don't know how I got off the bed. I don't know what happened to me from the time I stopped hearing myself scream. I don't know what happened to me.
The Woodworker attorney cuts the video off at the defense objecting and the judge saying sustained. Anyway, regardless, this clip is barely 90 seconds and added to the first one of less than 30 seconds. They together barely make 2 minutes of the 14 minutes dealing with this particular incident. Now, I don't understand why Woodworker attorney sees so much dodginess in Amber saying she could hear and feel what Johnny was doing, even though her face was pressed into a pillow. Haven't you ever been in bed with your eyes closed, with the lights off, and you can tell what someone else is doing? You can tell whether they're getting into bed, getting out of bed, turning, standing on the bed, sitting on the bed, reading. So I don't really see why there's so much sort of, whoa, how on earth could you know without looking? Can't most people tell what their partners are doing? In any event, Woodworker attorney uses this apparent mystery as a pretext to do a little demo, but prefaces this. In other words, he throws in his bias even before he does his demonstration. And his expert assessment as a partner to a small law firm is that Amber's version is complete BS. These are words that he actually says. That may be appropriate language for YouTube and YouTubers, but I don't think it's appropriate for legal experts, even if their secondary expertise is in lumber. Anyway, that's just my opinion. In terms of the Woodworker attorney's demo, which occurs at 1346, I've got a few problems with it. First, it appears to be recently cut pine timber. So he's gotten wood from, a hardware store, I guess, but it looks like it's recently cut pine timber. Second, the edges of the lateral piece appear to be tapered, that is to say curved slightly or rounded. And finally, he doesn't use the same size wood. It's not to scale. You might think that that is not necessarily relevant, but it is. And this is where I have a major difference of opinion with the Woodworker attorney. And it's not based on facts or legal arguments, but based on science and scientific reality. In Woodworker attorney's demo, he places a work boot onto the edge of his block of wood, and then with both hands he tries to replicate Amber's version of events. There's a ton of difference putting a shoe that you're holding in your hands onto a piece of wood and pulling and pushing it with some force over it, but I think you've got to acknowledge that it's some small force. There's a big difference between that and standing with your full weight on the sharp edge of a surface, not the rounded edge that he's showing here. There's a difference here. The edge here is rounded. The edge in terms of the bed is a sharp edge. And not only that, it's more than a foot off the ground, right? So when you are stepping onto something from the ground, the greater the distance towards the step, the greater the chance that you can slip and stumble and need to gain traction, right? Put it in another way, if you have a step that is very low off the ground, you don't need to step very heavily or hard or expend much effort, right? And so any situation where the shoe is not quite on the surface, if you've got some support from the ground, is going to lessen the total load on that surface. Does that make sense? Whereas if something is a lot higher up, the need to stay on top of that surface because you don't want to fall is going to be far more urgent. And so the kicking motion or the stepping motion is going to be just a little bit more frantic than if it was much lower. Because the alternative is you're going to fall. You're going to fall if you don't get your footing straight in a situation where your footing is uncertain or unsteady. You're going to fall, right? And so that's why I've got a problem with the size of the thing and the fact that he doesn't demonstrate it the way it should be demonstrated, which is put the shoe on your foot and then step on the thing with the right edge, the same height that it is. Do that and see what happens. So I do think you've got to compare what he's doing to doing something like pushing a football against a step and saying that's analogous to walking up steps with shoes and harmlessly scraping the edge off them. So at 1642 in his video, Woodworker attorney claims the only way to get into the grain is with a sharp object, such as, he says, a knife. And at 1716, Woodworker attorney says, the only fathomable way that I can see that particular break happening, as described by Amber Heard, is something like this. He then wedges the blade of a knife close to the very edge of the rounded, graded timber, snaps off a section and peels off the rest. It's a neat trick made all the more compelling by highlighting what does appear to be a folded silver multi-purpose knife lying on the comforter. And if I'm not mistaken, Woodworker attorney's video came out prior to cross-examination and prior to Camille Vasquez directing Amber's attention to what does look like a knife. So it's possible Johnny's team did actually use Woodworker attorney's research. But here's the problem. Number one, Woodworker attorney uses a wide blade to snap off the splinter. He initially seems to use a box cutter type tool, but then goes for something that's heavier duty. The knife on the bed is a multi-purpose knife and isn't likely any wider than the average thumb. Woodworker attorney's knife appears to be more than twice as wide. Woodworker attorney achieves the splinter by using a combination of downward force exerted on a very small area, that's the point of the knife, and then once he penetrates the wood, he uses leverage and the width of the blade to snap out a section. Clearly, the narrower the blade, the smaller the splinter. Number two, a sharp knife and leverage is the only thing that can make that pop. Those are his words. Now, I'm no lumber expert, although we did have woodwork at my school in the 7th grade when I made what's known as a rimpistool. But as far as I know, karate can be used to split planks, and the side or palm of a person's hand is hardly a sharp object. So I just want to repeat what he says. A sharp knife and leverage is the only thing that can make that pop. Well, what about karate? What about a person's hand? We also see this dramatized in the film Kill Bill 2, when Beatrix Kiddo karates her way out from the inside of a coffin, not with a knife, but with her bare hand. Number 3, as it happens, right beside the door to my girlfriend's apartment is a wooden staircase. Just as the edge of Amber's bed is analogous to a single wooden step with a sharpish edge and no reinforcement, a wooden step is, I think, a better demonstration of what typically happens when a boot steps on the edge of it than holding a shoe with two hands and pulling it over the edge, because that's what wooden stairs do. They get stepped on by boots. So I actually took some video of the damaged edges to these stairs, and I'm pretty sure someone didn't get down on their hands and knees and cut off splinters. I'm pretty sure people just stepping on those stairs caused the edges to crack and split off. Have a look. Number 4, in terms of my experience in other true crime cases, probably the best example involving wood is the Oscar Pistorius case, although I definitely dealt with wood also in the John Benet Ramsey case. But in the Oscar Pistorius case, you had a wooden door where the door was smashed to smithereens by Oscar wielding a bat while his girlfriend was on the other side. And in that case, it's also not a case that the only thing that could do that would be a knife. So I'm not sure it's accurate to make an absolute statement that the only possibility here is the one that the woodworker attorney offers. And that then brings us to the debunk. This is my version of events. So I've got to wonder whether woodworker attorney looked at Exhibit 509. This is just my supposition. I'm wondering whether the woodworker attorney looked at Exhibit 509, spotted the knife on the comforter, and using his intuition about wood and splinters, proceeded to reverse engineer his theory. In other words, he started off seeing the knife and saying, oh, I see the knife, that's what happened, right? If that's the case, and you have to ask, why leave the knife as a sort of narrative twist or flourish at the end, as if to say, oh, this proves it. For my part, I simply have to wonder who would use a knife to fake damage to the bed, then toss it onto the bed, and then take a photo of it with the knife in the picture. Further, if you knew you'd used a knife as staging, and the knife was in the picture, and you were someone who was inclined to Photoshop your photos, why would you not crop or edit it out, or not provide a picture without the knife in it? If your question is, what possible innocent reason could there be for the knife being there, I think there are one or two. One is that druggies use knife blades from small pocket knives to separate coke powder into lines. Sometimes they also use things like credit cards or perhaps a business card. Now, I'm not 100% certain of this, but I seem to remember Amber or perhaps somebody else saying that Johnny always carried a knife with him everywhere, and presumably often has some white stuff with him as well. So that's the other possibility, that the knife fell out of Johnny's pocket during this wrestling match. The next important aspect to address is that woodworker attorney's splinter is about the width of his hand, right? Perhaps slightly wider. And if you're not sure what I'm saying, go to the video and get a sense of the size of that splinter. The length of the split piece of wood from the bed in the Amber Heard case is at least twice as long. It's about as long as someone's arm. Again, if you're not sure, go and have a look at that picture and remember the width of a bed is standard. The width of a bed is standard. And now look at the width of that splinter, or you could, I suppose, say the length of that splinter, and compare the length of that splinter to the width of the bed, right? The length of the split piece of wood from the bed is at least as long as someone's arm. So simply trying to imagine that little blade, either splitting off such a big fragment or worse, carving it like a strip of beef, beggars belief. So you've got to take this version from the woodworker attorney and imagine it on a much bigger scale, but with a much smaller knife. Now, the idea that Amber staged something to appear worse than it really was, or to emphasize what happened to her, to emphasize it, that's not completely baseless. If woodworker attorney suspects all may not be as it seems, he could be right. And with regard to that, there are those two photos of Amber where it looks like the lighting is just slightly different. And so there does appear to be some basis to say maybe something is exaggerated, right? But what bothers me about Woodworker attorney is his absolute certainty one way or another if you consider the two images below. I think it's very likely they were enhanced or edited. I don't think these are two separate photos, one with the light turned on and the other not. I don't agree with that. I'm a photographer and I've done a lot of photo editing as a photojournalist for magazines, but it doesn't take an expert eye to recognize these images as one and the same. So there does appear to be some interference with the evidence in order to reinforce her story. But let me ask you this. Even if we accept the photo is enhanced or altered, is it or isn't it a photo showing an injury? That's the bottom line here. Was Amber injured, yes or no? I think one can apply a similar logic to the bed. Is the damage to the bed further evidence in an orgy of evidence of a stormy, tumultuous relationship? Or is the bed splinter staged and fake? The fact is, regardless of the bed photo, Johnny Depp sold the apartment less than a year later because he was in serious financial trouble. Contextually, you would say someone in financial difficulty might be in a bad mood. Someone in financial difficulty might be struggling with anxiety. And if she announces she's leaving him too, she's going to be an added financial burden when he can least afford it as well. She's going to be part of the great burden that he's facing. And perhaps he felt like or got a sense that he needs to take out his frustrations on someone, on something. In my opinion, Amber says this was a significant argument where she lost consciousness and seemed terrified that she might die. This is likely from a purely logical perspective. In these sorts of patterns, we see escalation over time, and this argument occurred near to the very end of the timeline. So it stands to reason it was one of the worst altercations. She also quoted Depp's words verbatim, "I effing hate you," and the way she describes his tone changing has a ring of authenticity to me. Sorry if you don't like my assessment. I'm not trying to be popular or get 1 million views for my clever but perhaps unlikely video. I'm trying to be real, and if that costs me subscribers, so be it. In terms of the lateness of the photos, it may be that her lawyer told her to document the damage. And it may also be that by then the bed was already made and the splinter thrown in the garbage, but then retrieved and placed back in the scene in order to document it. What I don't think Woodworker attorney acknowledges is a third possibility, which is that the cracked piece of wood wasn't dislodged by a knife or a boot, but by something else. Perhaps it was Johnny kicking it in frustration. Perhaps after Amber was passed out. Perhaps it was struck with a bottle or some other object. Interestingly, when you look at the tour of the home, more wood is missing from the other edge of the bed, which suggests it was even more badly cracked than we know, or that Amber was interning for Geppetto, or that later on more wood stripped off the bed as a result of wear and tear or of being stepped on, or perhaps the linen catching on sharp edges of wood and being torn loose. I do understand that the Woodworker attorney's theory is popular precisely because it ticks all the right boxes. It ridicules, undermines, and calls into question Amber Heard's testimony. The question isn't whether this evidence or any evidence was staged, however. The question is whether any of the 14 alleged incidents actually happened. Any of them. If your defense is that something on the timeline didn't happen because it was staged, then it's not an issue of there being not any evidence, but that the evidence is simply not real. Do you really think that this is a case where evidence is simply not real across 14 separate incidents, thus staging on 14 separate occasions, all the way back to the damaged Tasia Van Ree painting near her bed in early 2013? So I'm not going to take it any further than that. Tonight I'm going to be doing a live stream on Caitlin Armstrong and Colin Strickland. A friend has come out of the woodworks. Bear in mind, Caitlin Armstrong has been on the run for more than 2 weeks now. She's still a fugitive. And a friend has come forward, someone who's known Colin Strickland for 17 years. And we're going to talk about the dynamics and that promises to be a really interesting discussion. So watch this space for more details on that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Losing time, I'm fading fast. I just wanna make it last. Try to let go of the past. I close my eyes, embrace the blast. Sleepless nights and headaches stack. Restlessness to hell and back. What's my purpose? What do I grab? A slippery surface, a heart attack. And sometimes you just gotta believe there's something that'll give you relief. There's something that'll have what you need. What you need. We're broken, it's tragic. We're not all elastic, but maybe there's magic. Believe you could have it. And I know of sadness, the anxious and panic, the infinite vastness of all that is blackness.